Details about Catherine de' Medici and Narses have finally been released, and today we're going to dive into the new skills and understand, are these two going to be viable in-game if you have 5 marches already, and more importantly, can you pair them with a legendary to get a nice bang for your buck ranged march? What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another Rise of Kingdoms episode from your very own Shappy Gaming. For those of you new to the channel, I am a sponsored Rise of Kingdoms content creator, and today we are going to be diving into the new commander skill release for Catherine de' Medici and Narses. Now, before we get into it, you guys should know that Catherine de' Medici and Narses are both going to be ranged epic commanders, and this is the first time in Rise of Kingdoms that we are getting ranged epic commanders, which is super exciting because it means that when you start Rise of Kingdoms, you can actually choose to be a range/siege primary, which has never been possible before. Plus, with the release of the Mayan civilization, we're also getting a range buff for your initial starting civilization. So things are looking up if you're trying to be a siege player, but without further ado, let's read through the different skills that have just been revealed for these two commanders. There's also a correction that I need to make sure I call out here for Catherine, and I'm going to figure out if there's anyone you could pair these folks with that is a legendary commander that you may be able to get a nice cheap 5551 or 5511 early investment to make sure that you are doing the best you possibly can without wasting those gold legendary heads. Now, let's begin. Her first skill is obviously an active skill with a rage requirement of 1000. Nothing unusual there. She deals ranged direct damage to a target troop with a damage factor of 900 if the target's in melee range, and the range damage factor of 500 if the target is not in melee range. Let's be honest, most of the time the target's not going to be in melee range. And she adds a nice debuff there that for the next 2 seconds, the target troop is going to take 15% more damage. That's a huge debuff. For an epic commander, that is insane. That is all damage, and this is actually what I really like to see in ranged marches because I want them to be helpful to the other marches that I have in the field. If they're debuffing the targets that I'm trying to attack, that's perfect. That helps me out so much. So even though her damage factor kind of sucks, if we're being honest, I really like that debuff because 15% all damage taken is huge, and it doesn't look like there's a cooldown on this. So if I'm thinking of, okay, what do I want to make sure I do with her? I probably want to make sure that she has a Horn of Fury somewhere in her lineup, whether she's primary or secondary, doesn't really matter, but I want her to be popping this skill as fast as possible because there's no cooldown there, and you want them to be debuffing targets as quickly as possible. Moving on to the next skill, Star Scryer. This is a passive skill, which is pretty normal. It's usually just a buff to the different stats that each commander has, but this commander's siege units gain up to 15% attack, and while not in combat, their siege units also gain 10% march speed. This is fine. It's not great. If we look at the legendary commanders that we have, this kind of pales in comparison to Steven, who's about to release. If you guys haven't seen that video, I'll link it on the top right side of your screen. You can go check that out. But it's fine. It's not my favorite buff. I prefer general march speed, not the whole march speed in combat thing. So it's all right. Not my favorite. It's an epic commander, though. Let's be honest, guys. On to the third skill. Whenever this commander's troop launches a basic ranged attack, it has a 30% chance to deal ranged additional damage factor to the target every second for the next 2 seconds, with a damage factor of 300. So this is really 300 over 2 seconds, so it's about a 600 damage factor there. And if you're using the skill tree, you are going to want to go for that talent that gives you bonus to additional damage dealt. But 30% chance is quite a bit. If we look at the percentages, this is going to be proccing often. It's kind of like the dagger equipment that you've seen. So 30% chance is nice. The one bummer here is that cooldown of 10 seconds. That really sucks. I understand why they've done it, but that hurts. I'm not a fan of that. But this isn't that bad of a deal. 600 damage factor is actually pretty good if we're talking about just additional range damage. I'm pretty sure Alex probably has a little bit more than that, but realistically, this is on par with what we've seen even for some legendary commanders. So I'm not upset about this. I think this is actually pretty good. On to the next one. This is the Royal Banquet passive skill. Whenever this commander uses an active skill, nearby allied or friendly troops, including this commander's troop, each gain one of the following effects for 3 seconds, chosen at random. A 5% bonus to attack, a 5% bonus to defense, or a 5% bonus to health. And obviously these scale, so it's up to 15% for all of these. And I really like this, because again, siege are not going to be your primary march. Realistically, they're probably not even going to be in your top 5 marches. Mr. Siege will be roasting me in the comments, but that's all good. This, combined with that first skill, means that Catherine is going to be debuffing your enemies and buffing your other marches. That is what Siege should be doing, right? I'm happy that they're getting good trades, right? That's important. But at the end of the day, I really want my Siege units to be buffing my other marches and debuffing the enemy targets. The fact that they deal any damage is bonus, but this is really, really important. And I'm actually super excited about this because it means that you are going to be helping all of your other marches, even with this one. Also, this is like a pretty good buff. If we're looking at it, this is close to what Joan is giving you as a support march. And it's a ranged march that's also going to be dealing damage and probably taking pretty good trades. So honestly, this is kind of great already. On to that expertise. So this looks like it's actually going to be a bonus on that additional damage factor. And as you can see, when this commander's troop launches a basic attack, it has a 30% chance to deal range damage, obviously. Now they've upped the damage factor to 400, but it's increased to 500 if the target has less than 50% units remaining, which is reminiscent of some of the new commander skills that we're seeing. We're seeing this more often. And it's kind of like that whole Belisarius skill. When a target is below 50% units, you are going to debuff them. I like this. I think this is great. The cooldown of 10 seconds still sucks. I wish that they reduced that. But now you're getting an additional damage factor of 800 on an epic commander, which is absolutely nuts. Personally, I'm already blown away by Catherine. But let's take a look at Narses. So now we got Narses here. And the first thing that you'll notice right off the bat is that Narses has a different talent setup than Catherine does. Narses is going to be engineering, versatility, and defense, which honestly for ranged, I'm less excited about. I do like that skill tree because you're going to be trying to be putting out more damage when you're running Catherine, but maybe Narses' skills will play off of this. We'll see. Personally, I'm already a little bit turned off just based on the talent setup, but again, if you are rolling with a legendary commander as primary, this could not matter at all. So let's jump into the skills and actually look at what Narses is going to look like. So first things first, let's go over to that first skill. Okay, this is going to be a single target skill. And if this commander's troop is not within melee range of its current target, this skill deals ranged direct damage target to the factor of 300, and obviously the scales, and he reduces the target's march speed by 5% for 3 seconds. If this commander's troop is within melee range of its current target, this skill does something different. Your damage factor is 500, so it's a little bit more, which makes sense. That's on par with what we've seen. And it reduces the target's attack instead of their march speed. This seems pretty good, if I'm being honest. I mean, the direct range damage factor of 600 when you're just ranged is not bad. I believe that's pretty similar to what we just saw with Catherine. And the melee factor is honestly kind of irrelevant because, again, if you're running an epic commander in the field and someone is trying to attack you melee, you're probably not going to be trading particularly well to begin with. Now, personally, I'm more of a fan of that march speed reduction when we're talking about a ranged march. Now, why is that? Well, realistically, you want your ranged marches to be keeping other targets on the field so your other 4 marches can go take care of them. I like the march speed reduction also because there are a number of other commander skills that actually play off of a commander being debuffed on their march speed. And the slow effect is a really handy one to go off of. So I like that. The attack reduction really doesn't do all that much for me. And the other thing is when a target's in melee range, realistically, you're not going to be popping off that skill. So I'm okay with this first skill. I think it's pretty good. I like that they've switched it up a little bit, but to be honest, I don't really know how dramatic that difference is between each of those states. moving on to the next one. This commander's siege units lose up to 5% attack, but gain up to 25% defense. This is interesting. Personally, I'd rather have attack than defense on a siege march. Again, if a march is going to attack you in the field, you're going to lose. So the expectation is you want to be having a higher damage output while you're there. The defense is really only going to be more advantageous when you're getting swarmed, which again, you don't want to be happening when you're using a ranged march to begin with. So this is fine. I would have much preferred a raw stat bonus to the defense rather than this debuff that you're getting. I don't know how much it does for you, to be honest. Narses is already making me a little bit nervous about this. In theory, you could pair Narses with Catherine if you're playing in the early game, and I would probably have Catherine be the primary. But this is somewhat underwhelming. So let's continue. Whenever this commander's troop uses an active skill while in range mode, it gains 20% rage. It recovers a portion of its slightly wounded units, healing factor of 250. I like this. When we were looking at Catherine, my biggest thing is I need her to be popping her skills frequently. So pairing her with a commander that's going to give her a rage bonus is really handy. Now, I do have a couple concerns here. You're only gaining 40% rage, and it's only happening right after you launch an active skill. So there's no other state that can trigger you gaining this rage. So what it's really doing is making your active skill requirement go from 1,000 to 960, which is fine. It's not great, and this healing factor of 250 really isn't going to do much for you. To be honest, I think that I would rather have a 5.5/1/1 legendary range commander over this guy, just based on what I'm seeing so far. The defense is not all that inspiring. The rage bonus is kind of minimal. We've seen better with some of these new commanders that are coming out, and the active skill leaves something to be desired. The march speed debuff is fine, but it's not nearly as good as the debuff and the buff that we're getting from Catherine. So let's look at this fourth skill. Ambition is divine. This is another passive skill. Whenever this commander's troop deals direct damage, it gains a up to 5% attack bonus for 10 seconds. This effect can stack up to 4 times, and its duration resets whenever it gains another stack. So this isn't bad, right? Because you're going to be dealing range direct damage pretty often, so you would expect this to stack. So what this really means is you're actually getting a raw siege unit attack bonus of about 20% maximum, which isn't bad at all. I think that's actually pretty good, and it helps offset some of that debuff that we saw earlier. But again, I think there are probably other commanders that have better raw stats than this. I mean, you're getting 20% defense, and you're getting potentially 20% attack, which is nice, but beyond that, his kit really isn't inspiring that much for me. Let's check his expertise. So his expertise looks to be an improved version of the active skill rage regen, which is nice. And it is a 60% or 60 rage generation now, instead of what it was before, which I believe was a 40. And it recovers a portion of its slightly wounded units, and now that's going to be 400 healing factor instead of 250, which is a little bit better. It's almost double. But again, I'm just not that inspired by him. I didn't come in here with any preconceived notions, but I'm thinking Catherine is going to be the better of the two options here. So let's jump in and look at some of the pairs for these commanders. In theory, yes, you can pair them with each other, but I have some other ideas that I think may be a little bit more inspiring. So let's talk about the pairings for Catherine first, because I think she's going to be a bit more viable in the game than I think Narses is going to be, and I already have a couple of good ideas for who she could pair with. The first one is actually going to be Babur. So we're in game right now, we're looking at Babur, and there are a couple reasons why I like Babur with Catherine. So first off, he has the attack talent tree, which I think is actually going to be more helpful. He doesn't have the skill talent tree, which is a little bit of a bummer because I do like that additional damage factor. But remember, when we're in range, we actually do want to be increasing our damage output. But I like Babur with her for a couple reasons. First, he has a huge range direct damage factor, which, to be honest, I think she needs. If we look back at her skills, her active skill here is not dealing all that much range damage factor. It's really going to be about 500. So you want to compensate with something else, right? You need someone who's going to help bolster that. Now, the other issue I see with her is she's not very tanky, which makes sense because she's going to be an epic commander, but Babur does bring a little bit of extra tankiness to the scene. So if you look at him, he has an attack bonus of 15%, a siege unit defense bonus of 15%, and he's going to help increase damage dealt by up to 10% for ranged normal damage, which is going to be nice. But the reason I really like him is going to be his counterattack bonus. So this is going to be the 1, so 5-5-1-1. When in range mode, he takes 2% less normal damage, 2% less ranged normal damage, and deals 2% more counterattack damage. Now remember, the gross majority of the damage that the ranged units are going to be taking is going to be counterattack. And whenever he launches a ranged basic attack, he has a 10% chance to deal even more extra damage factor to the target. So I like that. We're combining assets here. There's synergy. It makes sense. But I also like the health bonus. This commander siege units gain a 10% health bonus. And whenever they take damage, the siege units in their troop have a 10% chance to gain buffs. So we know Catherine debuffs enemies and buffs allies, but she doesn't really buff herself. With Babur, she does. So you have a 10% chance to gain the following buff. You could gain a 20% bonus to defense and a 1% bonus to damage dealt. I think these two have a really good synergy, and Babur could be a great pair for Catherine if we're talking about just having a good epic commander that's going to work with some of the legendary commanders we have. Now, Babur also really doesn't need to be maxed. He could be. He's viable into the late game, but you can use him fairly early in the game with Catherine, and I think do particularly well. Now, there's another commander that I really like with Catherine, and I'm going to need to change phases here to show you. You guys guessed it, it's going to be John Hunyadi. I think that John has pretty good synergy with Catherine because, remember, what we want with Catherine is we want to be popping her buffs and her debuffs as quickly as possible. She's not going to be a major damage factor commander, so we have to make that up somehow while also making sure that we're triggering our skills as frequently as often as we can, because again, she's going to be helping our other marches. And John, I think, has some good synergy here. Now, John also has the support tree, which is interesting because with the support tree, you can help trigger those skills more often, which again is what we're trying to do. It's not my favorite skill tree for her, if I'm being honest. I would much prefer to have skill instead of support, but it could work. And worst case, maybe you would run her as primary, and that way when you increase the damage taken by a target, you actually could have John's active skill fire directly after it. So there is some synergy here, and if you want the skill tree, you probably could run her as primary. But let's go into why I like these two. Again, John has some pretty good direct damage factor in range. It's not great. It's nowhere near what Babur has, but we're trying to figure out where the potential is. Now, he deals direct damage factor of 900, and the range skill damage bonus he's getting is going to be 20% more. This is probably why you need him to be primary, if I'm being honest, because you want your secondary commander to get this bonus, but it's not the end of the world. It's fine. It does feel like you're losing out a little bit, but to be honest, there's some potential synergy there. But the real reason why I like this pairing is actually going to be his second skill, Sword in the Sky. Again, you're running 5-5-1-1. This commander's troops get 30% attack. Attack is nice. Again, we're ranged. We're trying to put out as much damage as possible. But when their unit is in range mode, it gains rage 15% faster. You put 15% faster and you get a horn, and this commander is popping their skills constantly, meaning you're buffing your allied marches and you're debuffing enemies as quickly as possible. This is why I like this pairing. Above all else, this is why I like this pairing, because of this rage bonus. Now, again, you probably could have John be the primary and use the support tree, and that will also help you pop your skills faster. But these are the two commanders I'm primarily thinking of for Catherine. John has these other skills too. Whenever they use an active skill, you can deal extra range direct damage, which we know we're already familiar with. And you have you deal more damage to troops with less than 50% units remaining, which is similar to what we just saw with Narses, but I like it better on John. So you're not expertising this, but just an idea there. Now let's talk about who you could potentially pair with Narses. Now Narses is a little bit harder to find a commander pair for. Because of the nature of his skills, You do want to help make sure that you're proccing your active skill more frequently because, again, he's gaining more rage and he's recovering slightly wounded units. So in theory, you want someone who's going to benefit from lasting longer in the field and who's going to benefit from popping their active skill more frequently. The other thing is, with Narses, you already know that he is going to have a march speed debuff, right? Because he's not going to have an attack debuff. It's really going to be that march speed debuff that you're going to see most often. So who makes sense to put with this guy? Well, you have a few more options. Again, you could use John Hunyadi with him again, and you're going to be a rage machine, but I'm not sure that's the best pair. To be honest, there are a couple commanders that are most viable, but nothing jumps out to me immediately as you have to use this. So let's jump in game and look at who we could potentially pair him with. The first commander I'm thinking is Margaret. You can use Margaret with just about anyone. She's super versatile, and she's going to be useful even into the late game. But I like her because you get that range normal damage bonus, and you do have a direct damage factor. That said, your range direct damage factor kind of sucks. The other reason why I'm less crazy about Margaret is because she has a march speed debuff once again. That's going to be what this third skill is for her. So you could run him with Margaret, but she's not my favorite choice. To be honest, and I know I just said this, it's probably going to be Babur again, because Babur is going to benefit from that extra rage that we're talking about, and he's going to help augment some of those elements that are clearly missing from this commander. We know he has defense and we know he has attack, but he doesn't have any health, and his damage dealt is pretty abysmal. The other thing is, if we're looking at talents here, Babur does benefit from lasting longer, so that healing is going to help make sure that this effortless skill can get up to the 10% damage factor that you really want to have. So overall, this is kind of who I'm thinking as the pairs for these commanders. I hope that this has been helpful. Let me know in the comment section below, are you planning on maxing both of these commanders? And more importantly, are you going to be using them? And if you haven't already, do hit that subscribe button right over there, bottom right-hand corner. Drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed. It helps me out a ton. Thank you all. Chappy out.